a few things that my kids have done recently. So we have this nice poppy wreath for Remembrance Day. I had I still don't know the significance of poppies, but my kids have been bringing home poppy stuff for the last week. They don't seem to quite know either, but these are the projects I'm getting. This is actually from my parents' basement. This is one that I remembered when I was trying to think of mementos and keepsakes. That is a placemat. And it has only survived because it is kept with the Christmas decorations. So it only comes out once a year. And then here's some other things that you might think of, especially from elementary school or from middle school, or sorry, from preschool. You got your popsicle sticks always. And then, of course, you always have to have a diorama. So I don't know if that's the kind of projects that you guys thought of when you were thinking of memorable things. But when I think about my elementary school years, these are the kind of things that I tend to think about. And what I want to share today is how we can move away from those type of crafts so that even the smallest children can make actual differences in their environment and in their community. So obviously I am going to explain the project approach and how I think the project approach helps children do that and helps teachers facilitate that. Like I said, I don't think I have to introduce myself too much to anyone here, but I helped Cassidy start the Kuwait Reggio Center. And what we really wanted out of the Reggio Center was we wanted something that was Reggio inspired, and that means that it was the children were researchers and the teachers were researchers. It was child-led and an emergent curriculum. That still means that we had standards, but that every year how we met those standards would look different because we would follow the interests of the children. And that is how we would meet those standards. So we wanted to move away from mass-produced things, mass-produced texts, mass-produced worksheets, and even mass-produced craft ideas. We wanted to really move to something authentic and individual, and where you won't see the same thing over and over and over again. That proved to be very difficult. The first few years, it is hard to explain, and it's hard to push teachers out of their comfort zone when most of us are so used to being handed a theme map and told you're going to teach this on this day, or you're going to have to teach cars in May. So the teachers were definitely overwhelmed at first, and it was hard to kind of explain. Then Cassidy found this framework by Lillian Katz. So she invented this approach called the project approach, which she didn't invent the project, but she really solidified it and created a framework. And then one of her best guides that we found was this hands-on guide. And Cassidy was able to use that to give to the teachers and give actual printouts, checklists, and it made everything much clearer for the teachers. And it allowed them to feel like they still had a framework. They weren't as scared, I think, because they could see a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so the project approach is an in-depth study of a topic by a child and by the classroom that the children are interested in. And again, it is incorporated into an existing curriculum. It meets standards, but it doesn't have to be the entire curriculum. So you can make it work with really any curriculum that you have. You, I'm sure, read the Lillian Katz quote. I love anything that talks about the scientific process because all children are scientists. We just have to show them the steps in order to produce good work. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go through the phases of the project. So I had my class set up with a lot of things from their environment. So we were in Kuwait. And so I had my construction area set up for that first week of school with blocks and then tons of pictures of them at Kuwait landmarks. You can see in the picture I have some pictures of houses and skyscrapers, the Kuwait Towers. And then I also had this picture that you see over here of the Sheikh Jabir Bridge or Causeway. And I wanted to I expected them to build these things and see what their interpretations of these landmarks were. And all I got was cars and roads and cars. So there was not a single home or tower built. It was nothing but cars and roads. And when I sat down and kind of started listening to the conversations, for instance, this picture you see, they were building a bridge as always, and a little girl came over and put this triangle in the middle, and another little boy said, no, triangles you don't need a bridge. You don't need a triangle on a bridge. And then she said, no, look at the picture. And so then when he looked at the picture, there's obviously a very large triangle in the middle of the bridge. And so that kind of collaboration and also attention to detail let me know that this is a topic that the children are really interested in. And so that was a great starting point. And I also want to just draw your attention to under phase 1, it says a child's learning must be documented. So that is part of the building blocks of the Reggio approach. So I have put the Reggio approach foundations mixed in with my slides to show you how well the Reggio approach integrates with the project approach. So obviously, if you're not documenting what your students are doing, you will miss a lot of things. And the best way to realize what they're interested in is to take documentation, because in the moment, it might just seem busy, especially in a preschool classroom. So having those photos to look back on, having those conversations can show you that maybe there is a general theme that you might not have seen that is interesting all the kids. And the child is capable of constructing their own learning. Another huge thing from Reggio. And again, I was seeing that when we were talking about bridges. You can see Kashi, they all had their own ideas about it. He made his bridge taller. The kids would work again together a lot, and they would tell each other different ideas. And then even in the playground, it became all about building roads and bridges for their trucks in the mud, and then eventually as you see themselves. So this also made me think, okay, we can definitely, this project is broad enough where all of the students are interested, and yet I think it's also specific enough where we can have some boundaries and we can complete this. So you always want to think of a project as not a theme. So for instance, transportation would be too broad. And you also have to think about, can your topic be explored in your environment? So will there be enough, will there be places to go to explore your topic? Will there be experts? Do the children experience this in their daily lives? And I decided that since this is basically their view from our school, that yes, bridges and roads are very, very, very relevant to my students. Kuwait is covered in massive highways. So I thought, yes, this is perfect. Then you have to refine the topic. So for instance, looking back on it, I could have probably just stuck with bridges. That's how much there was with bridges alone. But I did decide to do roads in hopes of encompassing more things. And what I did to kind of get the kids to give me their ideas, what they already knew about roads, what they wanted to know about roads, predictions they had about how to build roads, how roads worked. I gave them this map of Kuwait. It's a stylized map of Kuwait that you see in the photo, and then also just a Google Maps printout. And I just talked to them about what they saw, and I would draw their attention to the lines, and they had many different observations, and all of those observations went on this huge web. And then my co-teacher and I took that web and made it into 3 central questions to guide us. And those central questions are what you see on the right. So that's another big thing about the project approach is you do want to have kind of a question you're asking, and the kids might have little questions that go under that larger question. And I think why you really want those questions is because you do want to have a purpose and an end goal. So then is the longer phase. The longest phase is phase 2. And this is where you gather all the information you can find about the topic, where the children gather all the information they can about the topic so that they can answer those questions. And this is the part where I think a lot of people, when they hear emergent curriculum or student-led curriculum, they think that the teachers take a huge step back. And I found that it actually requires a lot more research on the teacher's part, because to create those learning experiences for them, you need to do a lot of research on so that you know about the topic. For instance, you see these, there's a cylindrical prism and a cube. And I didn't know this, but I guess a cylinder is the strongest shape to put weight on because it doesn't have any corners. So for instance, that's something I didn't know. And the kids were able to figure this out because when I asked, this is Khalid and Cash, when I asked them, why do you think the circle was the strongest? Cash said, because it's round. And when him and his friend were looking at the 2 other shapes that broke, it was a triangular prism and that long cube you see, it was the corners that broke. So they could figure that out. But for me to be able to have them figure that out by themselves took a lot of research on my part to set that up. The other thing that I had was a co-teacher, which not everyone has. Kuwait Reggio is a fully bilingual school. So I had a co-teacher through all of this. And we also had to decide what is going to be done in the Arabic part of the day or with her, what is going to be done with me, how are we going to make this fully bilingual, while keeping in mind that our students have very differing abilities in Arabic versus in English. And so again, this is where you saw in my previous slides, there was a lot of, block play, mud play, soft toy play. And that's all great. And that is part of definitely the project approach, that open-ended play. But again, you have to create scenarios where they are going to learn new vocabulary and new skills. It is not just play. So a lot of people just think, play-based, they think of project approach almost as play-based, whereas you just let the kids play and they'll figure it out. Well, as you can see in these pictures, there are certain things they're not necessarily just going to figure out, especially vocabulary. So I had to learn about piers, trusses, beams, arches, all the different types of bridges, why they work. And then I had to find ways to show that to the children so that they could really get a hands-on experience with it. And so did Isra, my co-teacher. And so we also had to decide what vocabulary worked in Arabic versus in English. So in English, all of our students were fluent English speakers. So they could learn truss and they could learn arch and pier. Whereas in Arabic, she could stick to things like, is the bridge straight? Do you go left or right? Is it tall or short? Or triangle versus triangular prism. And so it's really nice that the project approach also lends itself to a bilingual classroom, because you can think of especially vocabulary in many different contexts. And then also because it is a topic, it's obviously going to be relevant in both languages. Then another very important part of the project approach is field work. And this again goes back to making sure that you pick a topic that you can go on trips in your community. My students actually were very fascinated by trains, but we don't have trains in Kuwait. So that was one reason that I did not pick trains. And so you can see here what we did have was a pedestrian bridge right in the same neighborhood as the school. And that pedestrian bridge walks you, as you can see, over a very major highway with lots of underpasses and road signs. And so I could walk them right across that pedestrian bridge. They could see other bridges. And then you see there that they're sitting down and drawing what they see. And you can see some of their observations up on these drawings. And I also want to just draw your attention as I'm going through my slides about the mixing of individual work versus group work. So the other thing that you have to balance in a project is that community work versus the individual work. So I really believe in group work and project work at all ages. But you still have to be able to see what does each child know, and you still have to give them an opportunity to express themselves alone. So I hope you see as I move through that there are times when they can do things individually, there's times that we do things as a class, and there's times that they do things in small groups. So the other thing you need is expert interviews. So our other field trip was to an actual construction site where they got to see the plans for how the roads were made. And before we went on that field trip, I talked to them that we're going on that field trip, and we came up with all of these questions for the engineers that we would be meeting. And then you can see, so this is the presentation that the engineers gave for my students. And you saw in the previous one, they're sitting in the conference room. And you can see from the quotes that the children really absorbed a lot of this information. These quotes actually came after the fact when I showed them pictures from the field trip. So they were able to remember what they were told. And especially this part really impressed them because they had to set up this large hydraulic system to keep the existing highway in place while they dug underneath of it. And the students, that really caught their attention. The fact that if the highway above started to collapse or move, then there's all these sensors that would go off to tell the engineers something's terribly wrong. And so I love this picture, and I love the quotes that the children came up with. This is us, we're under the underpass where they're digging out the ground. The other thing that is definitely important in the project approach and in Reggio is parental participation. And so knowing that some of your parents either have access or their careers are based on something that has to do with your topic is really helpful. For instance, we have one dad that's in construction. He came in and made real concrete with the kids. The field trip was actually put on by another child's uncle in the class who works in the construction business. And then even if some of the parents aren't experts, still involving them. For instance, all of the parents, instead of just asking for one chaperone, we actually asked all of the parents to join us on our field trip over the overpass. And that's partly for safety. And also so the parents could really see what we think of as a field trip, that it's not just going, to the skating rink and skating. And it wasn't just, we're going to go walk across the overpass and then run around and play tag in the park. We wanted them to see that they definitely were going to run around and have fun, but those parts where we were asking them to do individualized work. And again, if the parents aren't going to be getting home little weekly worksheets and crafts, it's really important that you involve them in other ways so that they're seeing that work is being done. Just because they're not getting crafts doesn't mean that the children aren't doing a lot of important work. And then, like I said, the projects will always meet the standards. For construction, for roads, you would think probably more math than literature. But we did the Billy Goat's Gruff story. So we read the story, and then the children had to, out of recycled materials, build their own bridges. And then later I would hear them reenacting the story. So I know that they can tell the beginning, middle, and end of a story. Also at this age, mark making is very important. So just the fact that they were making marks on paper to represent things is one of our standards. And as you can see, this child, for instance, he was starting to sound out words, so he could write pond. So that it did meet a lot of our language arts curriculum. And then, of course, it met the math curriculum. Tallies are a huge part of kindergarten education, and conducting surveys is a big part of the project approach. So we were designing a road design for our bikes area. Kuwait Ridge Geo Center has a large area that's for bikes only, and it was kind of just a free-for-all. And so my class started to design a road for it, a map for it. And they had to vote on the entrance to the drive-through. And then you can also, I'm not reading the quotes because I know you guys can all read. But you can see that another thing that overwhelms people is lack of assessment. So they feel like, oh, if I'm not getting the children to sit down and do this activity and then judging each of them on it, how will I later go back and say that I properly assessed them? How will I write a report card? But I wanted to just show some examples of the fact that you, as long as you're doing your documentation, you can definitely get those examples for your report cards, and you can make those assessments of, do they know their numbers? For instance, this little boy, he had to read a number 13. Do they know how to write that number? Jazzy here on the left with the road, she's also counting numbers to see how far her car went. So you can definitely work in all of your standards. And then, of course, the most fun part of the project, at least for me, was the exhibiting the knowledge gained. So now you've come up with your topic, your questions. You have then let the children explore that topic for, in my case, it was months, and you've guided them through it so that they've learned some important things about the topic. And now they need to show what they've learned. So again, moving to some individual work here, I had them draw their own bridges for a pond that was being created in our garden. So another class, again, going back to the project approach, another class's project was on ponds. And so they were actually making a pond in our school's garden. And so our project was going to be to design the bridge that was going to go over the pond. And so again, you can kind of see assessment here. So on the left is what this child drew on our field trip, which was, I believe it was in September or October. And then what you see on the right, her two pictures, were done in February. So you see she's come a long way. Her arch bridge, she drew a cylinder, two circles that are connected. And so the final event, the final phase, should allow you to see growth in the kids. And then each of the kids, so again, individual versus group, we had all of their drawings up, and then they had to have a discussion and some voting about which design we were going to use. And this is the design they came up with. So they wanted hand railings, they wanted a beam bridge, and they needed steps up because otherwise they would just be walking in the water, basically. And then how high should the steps be? So these were all decisions that they had to make, and then they drew this collaboratively. And again, different kids can do different things. So some of the kids could draw the circle for the pond, other kids could write pond. Then what was really cool was that they got to express their designs. They got to give these designs to the engineers of the bridge. So as you can see, there's these two men here, and they are the ones that actually built the bridge. And we all sat with them, and the kids went over everything. They only spoke Arabic, so that was actually done in Arabic. But it was interesting to go back and forth with them. So for instance, the kids wanted their bridge built out of concrete, and the engineers, instead of me saying no, the engineers were able to explain, oh, we're building this in a muddy area, concrete will sink. So it was nice to have the experts kind of explain to them why we might need to alter their ideas. The other thing, like I said, is we designed a map that was going to be permanently painted on to the playground, to the bike area, for the roads. So they also had to design that. And you can see us putting the rough draft, which was just tape down. And they had to decide about crosswalks, safety, stop signs, etc. Then the culminating event is where you get to share all of this. So the parents got to come for a lovely lunch, and each parent and child got to go walk across the bridge and cut the ribbon. And you can see from their quotes just how proud they are to express to their parents what they did and that they really took ownership of it. For the culminating event, now you see all of a sudden the roads. So it's very different from the tape that was before. So the school went and painted that all on. And the parents got to come and go through our drive-through. And then the main thing, which I only have 2 minutes left, but this is where I was talking to Erin about this, why I really believe in this approach and where I personally would like to take it one step further is that the project approach also allows children to make actual differences in their community. So these pictures are not from last year, they're from this year, or they're from not even my class. So these are other children enjoying the things that my students have created. And these things will be there for years to come. And it's not that it's the fact that every day they get to see something that they made, I think really that's the difference. It's not just, oh, they know it's cute that they can say Arch Bridge. It's nice that they know what a stop sign is. No, the big difference is they know that they can change the community. And that's why I think of this as moving from a consumption model of education where we're constantly consuming materials, we're giving them mass-produced information, and consumption is very passive. Whereas I think we should be asking students always to create, and to create with an idea that they are going to help someone. Who are they going to help with this creation? And those are the kind of students that I want to be putting out in the world, are the students that believe they can and will go on to make differences. So I know I'm out of time, so I just want to let you guys know that if you need financial support, I found a bunch of websites because not everyone has the support like Reggio Center, where they gave me the funding and all the leeway to do this. So if you wanted to look at those, if you're in a place where you might not be able to get the school to pay for a project, and I know now I could also direct you to Aaron's website, because that is what his consulting business does as well, is create projects for schools to actually make a difference in their community. And then there's just a little video. If you guys need to go, you can, but this is just one of my former students who I was sent this morning, actually. He is explaining.
You can tell another school that you can build a bridge in your school, and in the playground you can make a bike section, and you can design the roads.
And how did they do that? How did they...
All right, so that is my presentation. I also have a sources slide there. And yes, and so I also have a sources slide there. But you guys can also just message me, because I think everyone knows me here. So thank you guys so much. And yeah, I know we might want to go to another presentation. But if anyone has anything they want to say, let me know.